The fact that they're pleading the fifth, that's a problem. It speaks to the level of cover-up. It's the largest cover-up, the largest corruption this nation has probably ever seen. We thought Watergate was a problem. No, we thought Benghazi was a problem. It was. But what we're seeing right now is absolutely insane.
Another former Biden official is testifying before the House Oversight Committee this week as Republicans demand answers regarding the former president's mental decline and use of the auto pen. But if history's any indication, we should expect a whole lot more in the way of stonewalling from the Biden team. Hi again, everybody, and we welcome you to another great hour of the Big Weekend Show. Kevin Court, Katie Pavlich, Dr. Nicole Saphier, and Tom Shalhoub, and this is the Big Weekend Show. As mentioned, 4 Biden officials have testified before the committee so far. 3 of them, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, Anthony Bernal, and Annie Tomasini, all saying this.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights.
I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
The advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer.
I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights.
I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights.
By right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Give them nothing, they will get nothing. Now, on Thursday, Biden's former chief of staff, Ron Klein, is set to testify, while Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donilon will appear the following week. Others, yes, are scheduled for the months ahead. And joining us now for tonight's big close-up is the House Oversight Committee Chair, James Comer, who is a busy man and doing all he can to make the country better and safer. And with oversight, my friend, I just have to ask, should we have any expectation that we'll get anything more than pleading the fifth?
I do. I think this week's going to be a pivotal week in the investigation. Having the Biden Chief of Staff, Ron Klein, in. He has not been subpoenaed. He came in voluntarily, so he can't plead the fifth. And, all the arrows point towards him as being one of the main players, if not the main player, in the auto pen scandal. So he's going to have to answer some questions. I think he knows that. His colleagues have all pled the fifth, so he's one of the last men standing in this, and I think he'll answer questions.
Chairman Comer, Katie Pavlich here. It's great to see you. So what is the goal of this investigation? And are you looking at criminal charges for any of these aides? What are you looking for in terms of getting information from these officials? And why would they plead the fifth if it's simply about their work in the White House?
Yeah.
Well, they plead the fifth to avoid self-incrimination. I think that says it all. Dan Goldman, who's a Democrat member of Congress who used to be on the House Oversight Committee, who was the prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, he's famously quoted as saying, you don't plead the fifth unless you're guilty of something. That's Dan Goldman's own words. But the purpose of the investigation is to get the truth to the American people. Look, this is the biggest scandal in the history of American politics. President Trump has said that many times, and I agree 100% with that assessment. We want to get the truth, and we want to, first of all, hold people accountable. But secondly, we want to look at everything that was signed with the auto pen. There were a lot of presidential pardons. There were a lot of executive orders. There were some even nominees in the Biden administration. Their paperwork that was signed with the auto pen at a time when the president's mental fitness is in question. Look, when his doctor, Dr. O'Connor, wouldn't answer a simple question, were you ever told to lie about President Biden's health? And he had to plead the Fifth Amendment to avoid self-incrimination on that question. I think that shows that the smoke around the Biden mental fitness theory is a raging fire now. So we're going to try to see, first of all, what really happened with the auto pen. We're getting a lot of good information we're going to be able to produce at the end of this investigation, which hopefully will be in the next couple of months. But also, it's going to raise questions as to whether these executive orders and pardons are legal. And I think that is a big issue for the American people.
Mr. Chairman, it's Nicole Saphier. The president is calling on Congress to work overtime to have his judicial appointments confirmed, saying on Truth Social he hopes Senate Majority Leader John Thune will cancel the August recess to confirm them. The Senate is scheduled to meet tomorrow to confirm 6 of his appointees. This comes as concerns swirl around how many of the President Biden's nominations were signed using the auto pen. Biden made 228 judicial appointments, including 45 appeals court and 187 district court judges. And most importantly, Biden appointed Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's most long-winded justice who couldn't even define what a woman is.
How do you decide when you're going to issue a dissent?
I feel like I might have something to offer and something to add, and I'm not afraid to use my voice.
What keeps you up at night?
I would say the state of our democracy.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No, not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that you're looking at some of the pardons that were done under President Biden and the use of the auto pen, Dr. Fauci being one of them, talking about whether they were legitimate or not. Are you also looking into Biden's judicial appointments as well?
Absolutely. Everything that was signed with the auto pen, especially in the last year of the Biden presidency, this is when all the books that are being written, all the tell-all interviews that are being recorded from his former disgruntled staffers and staffers who are trying to preserve their reputation for future employment, they're all saying that Joe Biden was in a deep mental decline and that he was protected by a very small inner circle. We brought a few of those people in the inner circle and asked them simple questions like, were you ever told to lie about the president's health? And they couldn't answer that question. They had to plead the fifth to avoid self-incrimination. This raises an issue whether these pardons, whether these judicial appointments, and whether these executive orders are legal. I believe that if this investigation keeps going in the way that it's going, that's going to raise serious concerns about whether or not Joe Biden even knew what was going on around him, much less whether he authorized the use of his signature on all of this stuff. I think all of these are in jeopardy of being declared null and void in a court of law. And that's a big deal for the Trump administration because so much of what Trump is up against in court now with these liberal, biased, Biden-appointed judges is the fact that they're using and citing some of these executive orders as reason to throw out President Trump's agenda and President Trump's executive orders. So they tried to Trump-proof the administration on the way out the door. And the problem they've got now is the American people realize that Joe Biden wasn't the one calling the shots, and he may very well have not even been mentally fit to make decisions to authorize the use of his auto pen, if he even authorized it. So this is going to play out in a court of law. I think our investigation is going to be a substantial part of evidence in it, and that's why we're doing the investigation.
Chairman Cohen, Tom Shalhoub, President Trump was quoted as saying the auto pen was not for this. It was not for, doing executive orders. It was not for judicial appointments and pardons. It was for writing letters to kids, just mass filling in your name when you're writing personal notes and things like that. Is there any legal, precedent for this? The auto pen, is there any law that says what you can and can't do with an auto pen, or is this just something that's standards and practices?
Well, it's murky with respect to the auto pen. It's just kind of a known fact that you're supposed to use your own signature with an either black or blue pen to sign anything pertaining to legal documentation, whether it's recording a deed, whether it's a subpoena like what I have the authority to do, or whether it's a judge signing a warrant, or a president signing a pardon. You are supposed to use an ink pen. Now the question here is more along the lines of, was Joe Biden aware of the staffers and what they were doing with the use of the auto pen? And right now, after about 5 interviews and depositions, I can say with confidence, there's no evidence that would suggest that Joe Biden had any idea what was going on with the use of that auto pen.
James Comer. We really appreciate you spending time with us, and I know we're going to try to, in the days and weeks ahead, unpack the constitutional remedy possibility here. Thank you again, my friend, for taking time out for us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Tom, with your question. Is there a constitutional remedy if it's determined that he had no possible way of knowing whether or not staffers, and some of the names I've written down: Klain, Bernal, Tandon, Zients, Rice, were they just stamping things? And if that, does that pass the muster?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Biden says, oh, I knew everything. I knew what was going on the whole time. But, if you sat him down and you said, did you sign this bill? Did you sign this? I mean, he's not going to be able to tell you what he signed.
Couldn't even walk on a beach.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. We wouldn't know because his physician, and he was absolutely right what he just said there. He said the physician pleaded the Fifth for some very basic questions that really it wouldn't have been giving up patient privacy or anything of the sort. The fact that he could have cited patient privacy, but he didn't. He pleaded the Fifth, which means that he was worried that he would be incriminating himself for something criminal. That leads us to believe, obviously, he knew more than he's letting on. And so without knowing a little bit more from him, it's hard to say. And I don't know how they're going to be able to prove legally to actually reverse some of these orders unless they can prove that he was cognitively unaware of what was going on. And that's going to be very difficult to prove.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
I mean, this is all about who was running the country. The issue is not whether an ink pen or an auto pen was used. It's whether Joe Biden knew it was being used and for what purposes. And it's very difficult to claw back pardons and commutations and appointments, especially of judges who have already gone through the Senate process. So we'll see where this goes, but it's certainly a valid question given that nobody elected Neera Tanden or the staff. They elected the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to make these decisions and to be cognizant of what was in the documents that he was signing.
He made a really good point, though, Tommy, when he said, you know what, there are some documents that you actually have to sign. I can't just auto pen a warrant. I have to sign that warrant. And I think that'll be the legal basis for arguing, especially for some of these pardons. I think there were like dozens and dozens and dozens of them, even hundreds, all at the last possible second. Again, this will play out, but I'm not sure that this will amount to a whole lot more than a lot of hearings. But I think it's a worthwhile endeavor all the same for the preservation of our democracy moving forward. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, when I sign a doc, I just had to have some documents notarized.
Yeah,
so not only did I have to sign it, I needed to have some legal authority next to me, a second person witnessing that I signed it. Joe Biden wasn't even there for that, so there was no second witness. So,
I use the auto signature all the time. It is a great tool. Presidential pardons, probably not an appropriate use of that.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, you know what? I think ultimately we will watch it all unfold. But I am of the opinion that if they can push this forward, there may be more there than we all know.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.